In this video, I'll explain several reasons as to why running on a treadmill feels harder than being outside and suggest some ways to improve your experience of running indoors. Hello and welcome to the channel. If you're new, my name is Chris and I'm an amateur triathlete based in North Devon in the UK. So I've been running on a treadmill on and off for around a year now, and during that time I've found that it can not only be quite boring but also feel harder than running outside, even though I'm supposedly running at the same pace. I did a bit of research into this to try and find out why running on a treadmill feels harder, and then provide some suggestions that I've picked up through my experience to try and overcome them, all of which I'll share in today's video. So when you run outside, it's very unlikely that your pace will remain exactly the same, and instead it will naturally shift from 1 mile to the next. This could be because you hit a bit of an incline, you have to slow down to cross the road, or you just forget about it as your mind wanders. On the treadmill, the opposite applies. You are stuck running at the same pace whilst the belt moves at the same speed. There's no respite unless you decide to, of course, change the speed or jump off to the side and stop running completely. And that's where my first suggestion comes in to make running on a treadmill a bit more manageable. Don't stay running at the same pace all the time. Vary it up a bit. If you're finding the pace to be too much during just a steady run, you can of course dial it back, but you might also want to mix it up and do some intervals or strides. That being said, running at a constant pace may not necessarily be a bad thing all the time, as the treadmill will keep you at that same pace even when the fatigue begins to set in and you'd normally slow down if you're outside. So this may be a more optimal approach if you're actually training on the treadmill to maintain a certain speed. If you're like me, you tend to run a bit too close to the front of the treadmill, which does seem to be a common issue amongst treadmill runners. Running on the belt that is constantly moving is different to running on the pavement in the sense that outside your stride is naturally lengthening and shortening depending on what the ground is like and how fast you're actually moving. Being too close to the front of the treadmill will also affect your natural arm swing, which, believe it or not, can have an impact on your overall form and how your running gait feels. So whilst the advice is usually to increase your cadence and shorten your stride length, the opposite almost applies when you're on a treadmill. Making an effort to not shorten your stride may help you save a little bit of energy, and from there make your normal pace feel a little bit more comfortable and more comparable to when you're running outside. You could try shifting back a bit so you're running more towards the back rather than the front of the treadmill, just to give your stride that little bit extra space, but do of course be careful not to be too far back and risk falling off, as the belt of the treadmill isn't overly long. Your treadmill will almost certainly be inside and probably in your garage like me, as that is just the most appropriate place for most people here in the UK to put it. The problem with this is that it's hotter inside regardless of the time of year, with very little, if any, airflow. Heart rate will naturally be higher because of this, and therefore make the effort feel harder than it would for the same sort of run outside. To cope with this, I set up a big fan to blow air straight into my face, and I open up the garage door behind me to allow some of the outside air to circulate inside. It's not perfect, but a whole lot better than not doing anything and end up dripping sweat through not having anything to cool me down a bit. By the way, if you're enjoying this video so far, I would love it if you could give it a thumbs up, so hopefully more people will discover it. You have to take the readings that the treadmill gives you with a pinch of salt, as chances are the more affordable treadmills that we are likely to have at home aren't 100% accurate. Even though the treadmill says it's at a 0% incline, it may not be, and even a small degree difference can make a run feel harder, especially during those longer ones where the fatigue builds up over time. Take a level and place it on the belt to see if this is the case, and then you can adjust the speed to compensate. The speed that the belt moves at may also be out a bit, so you may think you're running at a 5-minute kilometre pace according to the treadmill, when in fact you're running more like a 4:40 pace, which of course will make it feel harder than you'd expect. I tend to ignore what the treadmill was telling me and instead rely on my stride foot pod to give me what I believe to be a more accurate representation of my pace, cadence and the distance that I ran. Now the footpod may not be 100% accurate either, but to me it makes sense that something that's physically clipped to my shoe will be more accurate than a treadmill, which is really just measuring how fast the belt is moving. Hopefully that makes sense. You've probably heard a treadmill be referred to as a dreadmill, and for good reason at times. Running inside can get very boring after a while, even if you're doing something to take your mind off it, like watching a telly or listening to some music. If you're not feeling stimulated enough on the treadmill, change up the workout a bit rather than just running at the same pace the whole time. You could adjust the incline of the treadmill to simulate some hill reps, or even vary up the pace a bit in between a nice warm up and cool down. I personally find my runs both indoors and outdoors to go by much faster when I have a bit of variety in the workout and something specific to focus on in the moment. That being said, Being bored on the treadmill could also be an opportunity to build that mental resilience and focus 100% on the running itself without any outside distractions, which will hopefully carry over to improvements in your running outside as well. Running on a treadmill is physically different from running outside, and both do have their pros and cons. Outdoor running will help work the smaller stabilizer muscles that may not engage as well on the treadmill, whilst being on the treadmill is generally better for joints and ligaments as you have a softer surface to land on. When on the treadmill, the belt itself is propelling you forwards, meaning you recruit less of your hamstrings, leaving the quads to do most of the leg work instead. Naturally, you'll be working them harder than if you were running outside, as the hamstrings aren't taking up more of the load. This alone could be enough to mess up your natural running gait and make running on the treadmill seem harder than a comparable run outside. There isn't really any way around which muscles you end up using on a treadmill, so my only suggestion would be to incorporate both indoor and outdoor running in your schedule just to get the body used to both. So there you have 6 reasons as to why running on a treadmill can feel harder than running outside, and a few ideas on how to make it a bit more tolerable. If you enjoyed this one, you might want to check out this video here on screen where I show you my treadmill setup and how I run on Zwift to make running on the treadmill that little bit more fun and not something to dread. Thank you so much for watching this one. Hope you found it helpful in some way, and I'll hopefully see you in the next one.